Silent Hill 2 Remake is going to be out soon, and honestly, my feelings couldn't be more mixed than a bowl of nuts. Yeah, I know, a pretty lowbrow analogy to start the video off with, but shut up. Silent Hill 2 is supposed to be a huge comeback for the series, but like, I have some concerns, you know, even close to release, even with the recent gameplay footage actually looking pretty good, I have doubts. I mean, for starters, we haven't really had a good Silent Hill game since 4, you know, and even that's slightly arguable. Definitely since 3. 3 was like the last truly great Silent Hill game. Anytime this franchise has been passed over to an outside studio, it never turns out well. I mean, take Homecoming and Downpour, for example. Games that completely miss the point of what works about Silent Hill and misuse characters like Pyramid Head, you know, who have very specific meaning to the games they're from. You know, you can't just rip them from one setting and put them in the other. Konami in general has just shown a total lack of care for their main franchises within the past couple of years, and that's not something I can easily forget. Even as recent as the Metal Gear Solid collection, they've been being criticized for how they handle their franchises, because apparently with that, they just repackaged the PS3 remasters and gave us the worst version of the first game. Not to mention, we got like 2 of the new Silent Hill entries that are announced, and both were terrible. I mean, one's a horrible interactive TV show that I don't think anybody watched, and you know, those who by chance did, bless thee, you have suffered for our sins. The other was the absolute embarrassment that was The Short Message, a game that, you know, sucked so much ass I couldn't even be bothered to cover it. I mean, what else was I gonna add to the conversation? Ooh, it sucks. You know, it was just a poor excuse to repurpose Silent Hill to be this like really cheap mental health awareness PSA. Then you gotta factor in Bloober Team, this studio that, yeah, has been around for a while. They have various horror games they produce, and surely they have a certain level of success if they've been able to continue doing them and even be considered by Konami to remake what is possibly their most important horror game ever made. But I mean, how do I put this? I have never met anyone, online or offline, who is a hardcore defender or fan of anything this team has ever made. Right? Like, if anything, I've encountered more people who have criticized their work partially than I have people who praise it to any significant degree. I mean, I played Layers of Fear in the past, and it was potentially one of the most boring horror games I've ever played. Like, it was fun for like maybe the first 15 minutes, and it's like, ooh, look at the environment switch in real time, but then it just became like PT if it had no personality. And then you have The Medium, which is the game we're covering today. And it has its own sort of controversial, should I say history, or I guess critique behind it. Either way, this game is a bit polarizing. In fact, this is the game that gets cited when people bring up their concerns about Bloober Team remaking Silent Hill 2. So I thought to myself, you know, in preparation for this remake and to maybe, you know, hype myself up a bit, I'm going to play The Medium. I'm going to try it for myself and see if it's really as bad as some people say it is. If it really is something that indicates I should be worried about the Silent Hill 2 remake, or, you know, be excited for it. And like, hey, I'm not going to act like I have the biggest standards in gaming. But no, in all seriousness, I've liked some pretty trash games. Like, I like Operation Raccoon City for what it was. I enjoyed Devil May Cry 2 back in the day. I was a fan of Cyberpunk 2077 on the PS4. I actually did play that game on the PS4 and I still loved it. What the fuck is wrong with me? I even enjoy Brink, if anyone remembers that dysfunctional clusterfuck of a game. Brink was essentially the Concord of my youth, okay? You know, it stumbled so Concord could hurtle itself down a flight of fucking stairs. I had to get the Concord digs in while it's still relevant, right? I sometimes enjoy trash. Trash is in my veins. I am the trash, Randy. Surely, I will find enough good in this game to feel excited about what Bloober Team can do with Silent Hill 2, because like here's the thing, we're seeing the gameplay footage. Yeah, it definitely looks to be improved from some of the earlier footage. I'm not so much worried about the gameplay as much as I'm worried about how they tell the story of Silent Hill 2, because that is the main draw of this game. You know, it's that story. You know, if you didn't have that story, people wouldn't be talking about Silent Hill 2 like to such high esteem this many years later. Maybe the medium will surprise me and show me all the things people are saying about it are wrong. I said maybe the medium will surprise me and show me the things people say about it are wrong. I said maybe, just maybe. No way it can be that bad, right? Right?
This thing isn't a razor, it's guilt, shame, regret, memories of grief, loneliness. Kinda sounds like a spy name. Cutters, bolt cutters. It's more than grief, more than despair. This letter crushed her spirit. Anguish, fear, longing. There's grief, sorrow. I'm not your judge. I'm just the ferryman. Be gone.
My God, I hate this game. Fucking yikes, man. Like, I really didn't think the medium could be this bad. I thought people were exaggerating. I thought maybe people might be missing something. Or even if the game was bad, that I could find something to enjoy in it. But like, kinda? At best, kinda. I mean, if nothing else, the game looks great. But so did the orders in 1886. See where I'm going with this? Environments are highly detailed. You know, it's the type of game where, you know, you see everything and it's unmistakably handcrafted and meticulously placed, especially in the other world. Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. The other world. Everything in it is so beautifully grotesque and I love it. The fixed camera angles, my God, okay, I'm not even that big into fixed camera angle perspectives for horror games. You know, my intro to the genre was Resident Evil 4, okay? My bias lies in that third-person perspective. But, you know, like, I played enough of those classic horror games to have an appreciation for them, you know? I definitely think Resident Evil 1 Remake is one of the best horror games ever made. But I just don't have the nostalgia for that perspective that some other, you know, older horror fans do. Or I guess you could say longer horror fans. But the camera angles in this game are shot so beautifully. Like, everything is so wonderfully framed that I just can't help but to look at it in awe. The way they shift as you move throughout the game creates such a genuine sense of unease that it does leave me in a bit of awe. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Who's ever in charge of this aspect of the game, please give yourself a round of applause, because you're the MVP of this whole experience. It's just a shame that they're not gonna use this style for the Silent Hill 2 remake, because, I mean, it's a big budget horror remake. Of course, Konami wants it to be third person, even though the combat just does not look, you know, it just doesn't look deep enough for it to warrant the third person perspective, right? Like, why not go fixed camera angle and really set yourself apart from what a lot of the, like, other horror remakes are doing? But okay, whatever. The music for this game is also top notch. Like, honestly, aside from the camera angles, it's the best thing about this game. Akira Yamaoka, if I'm pronouncing that properly, really did some fantastic work here. It skirts that fine line of obviously being inspired by Silent Hill, but it's not quite, you know, the same. And I don't know, describing music's not my strong point. It's very pleasant to listen to. It's the type of soundtrack I can listen to in my spare time and actually enjoy it, which is a big plus for me. Like, you know, to me, the difference between a good soundtrack and a great soundtrack is whether or not I can listen to it outside of the context of the game. As far as artistic design goes, phenomenal, right? Like, you cannot accuse the medium for not being absolute eye candy. Or at the very least, you can't criticize it for being low effort. It's everything else about the game that's frustrating. So let's start by critiquing the very thing I was literally just praising, the presentation. Because, like, yeah, for as great as it is, it's not all great. To put it bluntly, game chugs harder than a frat boy on a Saturday night. Not all the time, but when it does, you notice. And to be fair, I don't have the greatest computer, and I will own that. But it's not so much my computer, because from what I understand, a lot of people have problems with this game's optimization. Even when I lowered the settings, I was still having problems. And that's because this game's frame rate problems come less from like the direct graphical fidelity of the environments and the fact that there's two of them being rendered at the same time, because that's when the chugs happen. Practically, it's those moments when you got literally two things happening on the same screen.
Testing the game on the biggest GPU out there on the RTX 3090, it's still possible to see how many dual viewport moments, even without the ray tracing being applied to them, will see drops below 60 FPS and rather far below 60 FPS at an internal resolution of 1080p. Given this fact, it seems like these scenes were not budgeted really at all with the idea of 60 FPS in mind. The game essentially has an extremely variable GPU load, which makes targeting a stable 60 FPS very difficult. On top of this, there's also the fact that the game seems to suffer from a stuttering problem in general that is attached to a number of in-game actions, like the changing of the camera angle, or entering a new area.
And like, here's the thing, I would honestly be fine with that if this whole like dual screen mechanic led to anything interesting from a gameplay perspective, but it really doesn't. Occasionally, at most, you'll have to do what are called these out-of-body experiences, where you separate the spirit version of yourself from the physical version of yourself, so you can explore some piece of the environment within the spirit realm without having them linked to each other. But you can only be in the state for so long before you have to go back. And it only ever really amounts to, hey, go into this area and like activate something so you can continue. They try to pass off the two worlds as if like one thing in one environment affects the other, and it kind of does, but also in like some of the most arbitrary ways ever. Like almost like physical Mary faces invisible walls if for some reason her spirit realm version can't go there. I think like the most damning thing about this whole like dual screens thing is that the best puzzles in this game, and I would just argue the best moments in this game, are moments where they stop doing this dual screen thing and have you just switch between the worlds through a mirror. And I just wish the game just handled it like that throughout the whole experience, because like, yeah, it would have led to more backtracking, and it's been done before, but listen, if it ain't broke, don't smash it with a hammer. Besides, if you're playing a horror game and complaining about doing backtracking, then I got something to tell you. Come here, listen. You're playing the wrong genre. Not that you can't criticize a horror game for over-relying on backtracking, but most sections here are small enough that that's not really a huge deal, in all honesty. The game does a good job of communicating where you should go and what you should do. Maybe too good of a job, but we'll get into that. The other reason I hate the two screens is because I'm not playing a DS game, and trying to pay attention to two screens on the same monitor or TV at once kind of makes me cross-eyed. It's hard to take in the amazing detail when my eyes are literally fucking strained. And I'm sure that, somebody watching this is like, well, I didn't have that problem. Good for you. I'm happy that you weren't cross-eyed while playing this game. For me, it was strenuous. Thing is I have no problem using two screens. I play DS games and I use dual monitors on my computer like all the time, no problem. But with those, there's like a separation of screen. You have a border distinguishing the lines that you focus within, and usually like with DS games and your computer, it's set up in a way where it's like one screen is kind of your primary screen, where like that's where you're mostly going to be looking at, and the other screen is just for like side stuff, But one screen having to share the real estate of two environments leads to some problems with taking in the game's details. If I end up looking too far to the right in the physical world screen, the the spirit world screen ends up catching my attention. Not to mention, as I said before, something in one world does impede your progress in another, so the game does kind of demand that you pay attention to both and take in the details of each environment so you know what to do. As for the gameplay outside of the whole dual screen mechanic, what gameplay? There's no game here, only pain. Shit makes Senua's Sacrifice gameplay look deep and plentiful, and I mean, I say that loving Hellblade. Go watch my review if you haven't. The gameplay loop here breaks down to basic ass survival horror puzzle solving by finding some item and then using it in a contextual spot to move forward. Something I'm fine with in, say, like Resident Evil 1, because problem solving in that game is more about giving you an excuse to run around the mansion that's infested with zombies, and the real game is like figuring out the best routes and which rooms and hallways you want to clear for safe travel. So like, I don't mind a bit of basic puzzle solving there, but it's like, you don't have any of that here. There's no combat. There's no other game mechanics you're really engaging with, so when the only real gameplay is puzzles, and all the puzzles amount to most of the time is just like basic bring this thing here or go do this thing so then you can go do this thing, it's just not doing it for me. Okay, to give credit, there are a couple puzzles in here that I kinda liked. You know, either because, you know, they involved more than just simply bring thing to here, or because it involves some cool visual. Like, there's this one, you shift time in a room to change the environment and piece together clues of what happened in there so you can move forward. I thought that was pretty cool. There's another where you have to try to get pieces of a globe in the spirit realm to move a globe in the physical realm, and that then can be turned to change the layout of the room so you can move through it. I thought that was pretty decent. One puzzle that I actually really enjoyed involved getting a code, standard stuff, but figuring out the code meant reading into a lot of dates, and the game doesn't let you know which dates you should and shouldn't be reading into, so you gotta do a bit of like deduction. You gotta tie things together and see what relates to what, and then do a bit of subtraction to figure out what the number was. It was like, nice, you are making me use my brain in a very like light way, but you're still making me use my brain. Another involves a dollhouse with a mirror inside, and you can move the mirror to different rooms within the dollhouse, and then that changes where a life-side mirror in the room you're in takes you. And I thought that was also a pretty cool puzzle too, you know? In a weird way, it is still just another, like, go to the different rooms, find the things, put them in the right spot, but like the whole, I guess, motif of the dollhouse and using that to traverse these different areas was unique, and it was interesting, and I liked it. Anyways, everything else is just way too straightforward or lacking in consequences that the game easily puts me in autopilot, and I shouldn't be in autopilot while playing a survival horror game of all genres. You know, if I want to shut my brain off and play a game, I'll play COD Zombies or some Borderlands. You know, those are my, like, casual, I will shut my brain off and just go at it type game. But survival horror, if you're not getting the whole noggin turning, you ain't doing it right. I play these games to fire up the last living neurons in my brain, not kill them. You know, it's just like the amount of times this game uses the go recreate some memory so that you can get some energy to then, I don't know, activate an electrical box or like use it as bug repellent. It's just kind of tedious. There are a handful of threats in this game, and most of them just turn to the worst kind of stealth section imaginable. Like, you know the kind where it's like, you have no mechanics to play with, you have a very specific solution, and if you fuck it up, that's it, you're dead, do it all again. I don't know, I'll admit, it's a personal pet peeve of mine. I just don't like stealth sections in games that aren't stealth games or don't properly build them up, you know? You can't just give me the ability to crouch in a couple hiding spots and say, hey, look, we have stealth now. And if these threats don't turn into a stealth section, it's just a chase sequence, you know? In other words, push forward to win. In general, there are not really any threats to contend with, which means there really isn't any sense of resource management, not even health, which means, like I said, what game? What gameplay? This is like just like a few steps removed from just being a straight up walking simulator. Well, let's not act like I'm like dead set against walking simulators. I don't want that to be the impression I give here, because I enjoyed PT. I enjoyed Outlast, which is like, again, like this game, a few steps removed from walking simulator. I liked What Remains of Edith Finch, and yeah, I know that's not really a horror game, but like, it is a walking sim. I enjoyed it, so I'm bringing it up. Here's the thing though, you know, all those other experiences, they're pretty short, right? So it's like, I don't mind them being walking sims because they're not going to take that much of my day. The Medium though is a decently lengthy game, or at least like lengthy in comparison to other walking sims. And to go on for that long while not having anything engaging to really sink your teeth into in the long haul, it's just, yeah, I don't know, it makes the experience feel even longer than it actually is. This game lacks common mechanics that make a survival horror game a survival horror game. So like, okay, clearly this game puts more of a focus on the story over anything else. Is that any good? No. I'm not even gonna finish that sentence. That's just a strong no. Like, no, just no. Not a chance. Like, no. Like, it is bad. It's so bad I might actually have to pay a visit to an actual medium to see if I can find my soul after this. 4 main things are established in this beginning. Mary, our protagonist, is a medium, which lets her communicate with the dead and see a alternative world. 2. Mary is adopted. 3. Mary has dreams of a girl getting shot at a lake. And 4. On the day of her adopted father's funeral, she gets a call from a strange man named Thomas saying that he knows about her past. More importantly, the dream of the girl getting shot at the lake. And like, for the first couple of hours, you know, I'm intrigued, you know, I want to find out what's going on. I'm immersed in the atmosphere of this game. You know, I don't even mind Mary as a protag, at least by this point of the game. She's obviously tortured by her past, but she never comes off as brooding or tortured, and is able to crack a joke, you know, even if her jokes do make me want to bang my head against a fucking wall.
Kinda sounds like a spy name. Cutters. Bolt cutters.
You need to shut the fuck up!
But then we get to the main thing this game is kind of infamous for, and everything starts falling apart. Like, and I mean everything. So let's bring up the big story critique people make of the Medium. Yes, this game really does have a horrible subplot that tries to make you sympathize with a child abuser. Originally I thought, nah, no one would be so careless. Right? Right? But no, apparently somebody was. Somebody was that careless. Somebody wrote the script, and somebody had to have looked over this, and they were like, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Throw it out! Alright, so, like, let's break some more things down. You get a call from Thomas at the beginning of the game. He talks about knowing about the girl who gets shot. This leads you to the Newell Resort, a destroyed hotel with a horrible tragedy tied to it. Mary meets a ghost girl called Sadness, totally not on the nose name, by the way, and a lot of the mystery revolves around this girl called Sadness. It's pretty clear that she's the girl who got shot at the lake. But who is she exactly, and what is she doing here? That's not clear, and that's fine, you know, there has to be some mystery. And as you go through the building, you start finding out about Richard, Thomas, and the relationship these two people had to each other. Essentially, Richard being this father figure to Thomas, who Thomas looked up to and later put his daughter within his care. Eventually, you find out that Sadness is Thomas's daughter, the same one he put under Richard's care, and Richard's kind of a creep who... You get the point. You get the point! In other words, this guy's Dr. Disrespect if, you know, Twitch never intervened in those whispers. But there was no actual plans for him to meet up with the girl, and she's like, you know, she's like, what, you know, you never considered she might be 17 3/4 years old. Shut the fuck up. If you're defending Dr. Disrespect at this point, you're disgusting. So anyways, right after finding out that, you know, Sadness is Thomas's daughter and that Richard hurt the Sadness, I don't know why I said her name that way, the Sadness, but we're sticking with it. After Richard hurt the Sadness, Thomas justifiably, you know, makes this guy a vegetable, you know, because that's what you do. You either kill the man or you make him a vegetable for the rest of his life. And yet, though, this is the first time we're seeing Thomas in the game, and he's being presented with this idea of a questionable, morally questionable doppelganger who is helping him out. And it's like, okay, you're kind of sending mixed messages here. It's like, on one hand, we're seeing a man who is justifiably upset at a creep. On the other hand, we're presenting this man as having a dark side. Like, why don't we present that dark side later or earlier? Why does this have to be the introduction? You know, whatever, on its own, it's not a big deal, but it's just like bad timing, right? But it's not just the fact that this happens, you know. There's way more to why this is horrible. Because right after that, we have to play a dedicated segment of the game where we pretty much just go through the childhood of the child molester and find out just how bad his childhood was. Listen, you don't understand. His daddy died in war. His stepdaddy was an abusive alcoholic. You know, his friend died. You know, so like, listen, he's just a tortured soul. He only molested a child because he himself was tortured deep down inside. He's possessed by demons. Don't you get it? Keep in mind, this is all happening practically right after we learned that he molested a child. Who thought this was a good idea? And then as Thomas, you know, we kill the kid ghost of Richard in the spirit realm, because apparently killing the kid ghost in the spirit realm is what makes him into a vegetable in the real world. I'm not questioning the logic here. It's a whole bunch of magical hoopla. Then, like, we get a scene of Mary, who is then talking to the demon, the what's left of his soul, the manifestation of his tortured past. And it acts all evil, like villainously evil, but then takes a turn out of nowhere, and it's like, actually, I feel nothing but suffering for the thing that I am. Please, Mary, please end me and end my suffering. And Mary's like, no, you deserve to suffer, but also I gotta get out of here. So like, yeah, I guess I'm gonna like end your suffering and kill you, you know. But it's alright, because like she gives this cool line where she says,
I'm not your judge. I'm just the ferryman.
It's just like this whole subplot boils down to people who are abused become tortured and abused others. Talking point that is only ever half the story at best. Like, yes, forms of abuse can be internalized and then perpetuated or manifested into something worse down the line by those who suffered through it, but, like, that ignores the plenty of abuse victims who don't go on to abuse others. Now, do I think this was the intention of Bloober Team? Nah. In fact, I think they try to make it clear that Richard, the molester in question, is still horrible for what he did, but they do it in a way that leaves the message muddier than a heavy-duty truck after a day of doing truck things. Like, pulling shit. I don't fucking know. Point is I don't get if this game wants me to feel bad for Richard or to hate his guts. Sure, Thomas and Mary take moments to say stuff along the lines of,
okay, Richard, I get the picture. Doesn't change a goddamn thing.
You don't deserve it. You deserve nothing. Nothing. Do you hear me?
but that doesn't change the amount of time, the amount of in-game time the medium spends making you go through the tortured past of a child abuser right after we find out that he's a child abuser. It's a simple matter of framing, right? You know, characters' actions and beliefs don't represent the message of the story. They represent the characters, you know? Like, let me use an example with a show I'm sure most people have seen, Breaking Bad, right? Like Walt, as a character, says he's doing everything for his family, and to an extent that's true, but the framing of the story makes it clear that there's actually a lot of this that's being driven by his ego and his sense of dissatisfaction with his life and where he ended up in life and feeling like he has no control. And look, if that example doesn't work for you, fine. Let's put it away without examples. If Bloober Team could recognize that they needed to have their characters make these offhand comments about how Richard's a bad guy, then they should have had the foresight to do some rewrites to make sure that people couldn't, like, misinterpret through the themes in the presentation that they're trying to play defense or make you sympathize with somebody who committed child abuse. Lesson for life, right? Like, sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And sometimes it's what you don't say, and sometimes it's the amount of energy you put into saying it. And it feels like there was just more time put into making Richard sympathetic and making us see his horrible past than seeing the harm caused to Thomas and Sadness as a result of his actions. You know, it's not like we ever see Thomas's past with Richard and see the relationship they had to really drive home the sense of betrayal, you know. And though Sadness and her struggle does get humanized and touched on, you know, they do reveal how this event kind of later affected her life, again, it's like briefly touched upon in comparison to the amount of time we spend in this segment of the game. In fact, when we get into, like, exploring Sadness as a character in her past, her struggle revolves more around hating her younger sister, who she's mad at because their mom died while giving birth to her. But, like, now I'm jumping ahead to a different part of the story. The first time this game even references, it's part of another subplot where he's abused and mistreated by this nurse while he's, like, in a paralyzed state because, like, I guess they had an affair, but Richard ended up breaking up with her, so she ended up being scornful, and when he became paralyzed as a result of Thomas, you know, giving him his just desserts, she treated him badly too. It's like, look what horrible things are being done to this old man who we're later going to reveal to be a child abuser. Like, I guess retroactively I'm supposed to look at this and be like, oh, well, turns out the nurse was in the right. But they really play up this sense of, like, villainy and enjoyment in her torturing him. So it kind of ends up being slightly mute. And if you're still not convinced that this game ends up trying to make you sympathize with this guy, you have the Henry subplot, which is a subplot that takes place a little bit later in the game. So I guess I gotta give the context to that before I can talk about it. Throughout the game, you find out more about Thomas and his powers, and that he's had them since he was young, and in his adolescence, he was, you know, held captive and exploited by the Russian government. He eventually broke out and, you know, moved to wherever this game takes place. I don't know the setting, I don't care. For years, he suppressed his powers, and that's what allowed him to remain hidden and off the radar. However, when, of course, Richard did what he did, you know, Thomas used his powers on him, you know, which put him on the radar of the Russian government, and they sent a man named Henry Wilkes after him. Anyways, Henry Wilkes tries to get information out of Thomas by torturing him and setting his house on fire with his kids inside because this guy's a total fucking psychopath. After that, we get another segment where Thomas enters Henry's mind and we get to see his tortured past. During this segment, this game turns into a weird, like, anti-communist piece, but whatever, least of my concerns. Anyways, you find out that Henry grew up under a socialist father who he grew up to hate and eventually rat out to his government. Then you find out about his family and his relationship to his son, and that, you know, he loves his wife and kid dearly, you know, even though he might not be the greatest at expressing it, you know, he does try to keep his work and personal life separate for that reason. But then you get to his kid ghost, whatever, and it's all like, hi, you expected me to be a tortured child, considering my father was a psycho-communist socialist who abused me? But nah, it's just me. I'm just evil. Sometimes people are just evil.
What exactly were you hoping to find here? A guilty conscience? A vulnerable child behind a monster? is no child. There is only
Which, on top of being hokey, does establish the idea that some people are just evil and that, you know, there is no justification for it. So, if you can acknowledge some people are just evil, why connect that to a guy with a genuinely nuanced struggle of political beliefs and not a guy who's a literal pedophile? Like, surely out of the two, I can sympathize more with somebody falling into some pretty horrible fascistic beliefs or falling too far into patriotism as an extreme countermeasure to spite their father, versus a guy whose struggle is, well, I was just mistreated as a child, so I'm gonna go touch some kids now. Bye. He's possessed by demons, don't you get it? This is why when I say this game tries to get you to sympathize with a pedo, I don't mean it lightly. It's not just the playing up of his tragic past, it's the contrast between how they treat him over someone who, in my opinion, has a far more nuanced struggle of nationalism and how it takes root. It's the amount of time spent on Richard's backstory. It's the fact that if you go to the Medium wiki on both these characters, Henry at best has a paragraph explaining his backstory, whereas Richard has roughly 10 or 11 paragraphs explaining him. I know wikis aren't always the greatest source of info, but it's often a good aggregate of what info exists, and the fact that Richard has a much longer bio than Henry it's not the fault of the wiki or the people who write the wiki, it's the fault of the game and how it presents these characters. Look, I don't want to morally grandstand here, and it's not like I'm against people tackling these themes in stories, right? Like, in fact, I don't want to discourage it because I prefer a world where people try and fail than one where people don't try at all. I don't by any means see this as a reflection of anyone at Bloober Team's views on this extremely dark subject matter, and that's not what I want to imply here. But it's also the type of thing that needs to be handled with a lot of care, because, you know, if you don't, you either trivialize the issue or, well, you inadvertently excuse it, something that can't be rectified with repeated lines from characters openly commenting about how bad this person is. So, okay, this subplot involving Richard, horribly done. Is the rest of the story good? I just don't think any of these mysteries the game sets up in the early hours come together in any, like, satisfying way. So, let's recap where we are. Mary, who was adopted, gets a strange call from Thomas about a girl who gets shot in her dreams. Mary goes to Niwa, learns about Richard, the resort getting destroyed, how Thomas hurting Richard put Henry on his trail, and that Sadness's real name is Lily. She is Thomas's daughter, and so is Mary. Yeah, turns out Thomas be your daddy. In Henry's attempt to get info out of Thomas and torture him, he set the house on fire with you two inside, and Lily made a deal with a devil to essentially get you both out safely. A demon that is supposedly the manifestation of what Richard did to her. Hopefully you're still following. The events of that night left Mary in a coma, and I guess so traumatized that she lost her memory, and Thomas just decides to put her up for adoption and not bring her home for her own safety. However, now, at the present point of the story, the demon that Lily manifested can't get to Lily, so it's after you. Okay, I wanted to be sure, so I looked it up, and no, the maw is not trying to possess Mary. It's trying to kill Mary because Mary can kill it. There's still problems with that setup, like the ending, which I'll talk about soon, and, you know, the whole idea of Thomas asking Mary to come back to this place where it puts her in harm, but I just wanted to correct the record there. To protect Lily, Thomas locked her away in a salt-laced bunker because apparently salt keeps away the demons. And laced in all this is the side plot that I mentioned earlier about Lily hating Mary as a child because of the death of their mother, but like that doesn't really get fleshed out into anything meaningful because it turns out when push comes to shove, you know, Lily's just like, yeah, I know, she's my sister, I don't hate her, and makes the deal with the maw. I mean, I will say this, with that context, it does make me think that the maw is partly a manifestation of Lily's old hate towards Mary, but I don't know if that's just me reading into it or if that's actually intended at this point. So now that we've gone through all of that, I have some questions. If Thomas and Lily have literal manifestations of themselves in the spirit world, why is that not the case for Mary? I mean, I can accept their powers work differently, but like, what is it about Mary's powers where she doesn't get an actual, like, manifestation of her own? Throughout the game, her spirit form is kind of just presented as like a perception thing. Like, that's just how she's seen within the context of that world. It's not another her or another part of her psyche. Is it because nothing super tragic happened to her? Because, you know, that is a common thread with the very important characters. You know, Richard, Henry, Lily, Thomas, they all have their own manifestations. But surely, Mary has some trauma of her own. I mean, like, she was in a house fire, was an orphan with no memory of, like, where she came from. Like, that's not... I don't imagine that being a fun experience for a child, on top of also having this unexplainable power. You know, just the power to see ghosts and talk to the dead and see a whole realm of the dead. That doesn't traumatize her at all? Okay. Or I guess it's not traumatizing enough to reach the threshold to get cool demon monster thing. Sorry, Mary, you should have had a worse childhood. Like, I don't know, it's just like, this game's whole theme is sadness and grief, but get sadness and grief and how that manifests. But this is all explored through characters we don't spend enough time with or see reconcile with their own demons for it to really matter. And because of that, this whole demons are a metaphor for mental illness thing just kind of comes off as very surface level. By the end of the game, it's revealed that to kill the Maw, the big creature of the game, Mary has to either kill herself or kill Lily. But if the Maw can manifest itself through either of them, how does that work? Like, had they set it up that, you know, Lily has to die to stop it, that makes more sense because it spawned from her. But the big ending scene is this dilemma where Mary has to decide which one of the two of them to shoot. But like, again, what about killing one of them stops this creature? And though I can't say for sure, because it just cuts to black, it is implied that Mary kills herself. But that doesn't feel like a justified response because, one, Mary is not set up as being a suicidal character, not even in the slightest. 2, she's essentially doing it on behalf of a sister she barely knows. Like, you grew up most of your life away from her, and though I can buy Mary wanting to solve this mystery and discover her past and wanting to meet Lily, I can't buy her throwing her life away on behalf of them. Like, in my opinion, the ending should have just been clearly Mary kills Lily with the acknowledgement that had things been different in their lives, they would have had a loving relationship with each other. But, like, again, it's this cliffhanger that, again, heavily implies the opposite, and it doesn't really make sense in the context of everything we learn. And it's just doing it the other way would have still left the story on a tragic note and leave a potential arc for Mary in a sequel as she grapples with having to kill her own sister. You know, maybe this is where she gets her own, like, spiritual manifestation of her guilt or sins or grief. Not to mention, this all leads back into the whole initial mystery of the girl who gets shot at the pier in Mary's dreams, and turns out it was Thomas who shot the girl, and the girl was Lily, except Thomas didn't really shoot her at all. That was a lie. Apparently he couldn't do it, which does make sense for his character. That's not what bothers me. The problem, for me, is that the big question that this game proposes, the big mystery that's supposed to push you forward into finding out what happens and sticking with it, is a lie. It's a false scene. Which is just a storytelling device I hate beyond belief, you know. To each his own, I personally hate it. I mean, it's like, I love a good twist, but there's a difference between not giving someone all the pieces or presenting something, you know, early that doesn't quite make sense in the moment, but, you know, will once you get the greater context. And then they're selling us a lie and then saying, haha, we got you. You bet you didn't see that coming, did you? We subverted your expectations, didn't we? You totally would have never guessed that the girl we showed practically getting shot at the beginning didn't actually get shot at the beginning. And it's like, oh yeah, you sure did subvert my expectations in the same way they would be subverted if I ordered McDonald's and somehow was handed Burger King. Like, yeah, if that happened, my expectations would be subverted there too. I wouldn't see it coming at all, and now my day's ruined. Like, sure, okay, the screen cuts black, we never see the bullet hit Lily, but like, how many games really have the guts to show dead children? Not many. So, my assumption is they just cut the black simply because they don't want to show a child getting shot. Which is reasonable, that makes total sense. And the thing is it's still not necessarily super surprising to find out that he didn't shoot her, because it's like, with something like that, with the cut the black, there's really only two solutions as to what happened, right? But it's like, still, the main mystery is, man, this girl got shot at the pier, I wonder what led up to that. Oh, turns out the girl wasn't actually shot at the pier. And that leads into another question, right? Because if this whole scene's a fake out, if Lily didn't get shot here, why is this the thing that Mary sees as a vision? Like, forget how she has any vision of Lily's memories at all. Like, surely there are far more tragic events from both Lily and Mary's past to draw visions from. You know, one's not built off of lies and misrepresentation. Like, what if instead of a vision of Lily getting not shot, you have a vision of a burning house and the silhouette of a monster she can't fully make out? You know, things that in the grand scheme of things are more relevant to the plot and actually happened. Just a thought. But you want to know the kicker, right? Because everything I just mentioned so far, yeah, frustrating. I don't like it. It makes me not want to play this game ever again. But it's admittedly not even the worst thing about the medium. No. The worst thing about the medium is that the characters in this game never shut the hell up. Not just in the typical annoying way most games do it nowadays, you know, like Forspoken and Suicide Squad, but in a way that actually I think ruins the game more than in those games. Like, take a game like Borderlands, right? You know, there's plenty of annoying dialogue in it, but it's not super important, so you can essentially tune it out, or even go in the options and turn it all off and still be able to play the game, because, you know, the things you need to accomplish in it and the things the game asks of you don't require that. But the nature of survival horror is that of making the player take in every piece of info that they can, you know, whether that be, you know, every note they find, you know, every piece of dialogue spoken, symbolism in the environment and enemy design. But in that spirit, in the spirit of making the player take in every detail, there is such a thing as too much. And you cross the line of being too much when every character practically explains the plot to you and any subtext within it every time they interact with something. If Mary farted in this game, she probably would have commented on it by, like, telling us about how it, like, reeked of sadness and regret because she shouldn't have eaten that Taco Bell yesterday. When it comes to looking at an item, practically everything triggers dialogue, which seems impressive. It kinda is from a technical standpoint, but, you know, if you put the item down mid-speech, it ends, and as we established, survival horror is a genre that prods you into taking in every detail. So every time you pick something up, you essentially have to sit there and listen to it because it could be important. Or at least you're in the mindset that it could be important. Like, I appreciate the effort, but it's a lot of effort put into making the game feel more tedious than it has to. But again, the annoyingness of the dialogue is a side point. What's really an issue is how it spoils its own mysteries. And to explain how this is such a problem, I need to talk about Silent Hill 2 for a little bit. Because yes, the main story of why James is called back to Silent Hill and how Mary died and all that is made very clear by the end of the game. It's not that much of a mystery by the end of it. All of its other mysteries, like what's going on with Angela or Eddie or who Laura is or who Maria is, or what these creature designs symbolize are all mysteries left up to the player to solve on their own. And what I like about this approach is that it gives you something that by the end you can feel you got some sense of closure on, while also giving you a lot of other stuff to dig into and try to unpack. You know, Silent Hill 2 is a story that leaves all of its pieces in front of you and lets you piece it all together. Whereas the medium lays the pieces in front of you and then is worried you won't finish its amazing puzzle that it crafted, so it backseats the entire process and eventually just ends up ripping the fun out of it. Because turns out the fun of a puzzle, whether that be a literal puzzle within the game or the puzzle of what's happening in your story, is racking your brain around it for a while and having that aha moment. Or it's that group effort of the fans coming together to bounce theories off of each other. You know, the fun of a mystery is having something to solve. That is lost when you go out of your way to spell everything out for me, often before I've had the moment to think about it myself. It points everything out to you down to the emotions of the room, and I'm not kidding you. That is actually a thing. The amount of times Mary or Thomas enter a room and comment on how the room feels is honestly ridiculous.
You think you're tough. When you hear them squeal and you smell their bodies burning, you'll tell me everything. You'll beg me to listen.
God. There were children inside. Was she? Was I? This thing isn't a razor, it's guilt, shame, regret. It feels cold. Memories of grief, loneliness.
Idiot! Useless old hag! Why would he care any more than the others?
It's more than grief, more than despair. This letter crushed her spirit. It all hit me as soon as I entered the room. Anguish, fear, longing.
What is that?
Were you hoping to find here? A guilty conscience? A vulnerable child behind a monster? There is no child. There is only
Loss. Hatred. Grief. This place reeks of them. Something terrible happened here. Grief. Anger. I can work with that.
Like, I get she's her own character and not an embodiment of the player, but so is James, and he knew how to not talk a whole lot. There's many flashbacks where the implication is already clear, but Mary has to say something just in case you, the player, are too dumb to get it. Like, Richard is obviously a creep, but I never would have figured that out if Mary didn't, openly comment about how she thinks he's kind of creepy.
Uncle Richard, my arms are getting tired. You've been drawing me for hours.
Almost done. You know, Lily, you remind me of someone. A girl I knew when I was very young.
Did you love her?
Yes. With a young, innocent love, free of the ferocity of adult lives.
Richard. I'm getting a weird vibe from him. There's grief, sorrow, and something else.
Not to mention, there's moments where this, attitude of having characters comment on everything or having there be some sort of dialogue tied to everything hurts some admittedly nice visual storytelling. Because telling things through visual metaphor means that players and viewers will have to think about what these visual metaphors mean, and that means that they might actually miss the point of what it means. We can't have that now, can we? No, we can't have people accidentally misinterpret our story now, can we? In fact, since we're already back on Richard, here's an example of this very thing. You find out in his flashbacks he had a friend named Rose, who he would play with in a maze garden, and that something bad happened to her friend Rose. Now, you pass through this maze about like 2 or 3 times during the duration of this segment, and during the last one, you find some roses that wilt and die when you investigate them, as it also starts to rain. And it's not even like this is the most subtle thing in the world, but it is visually striking, and best of all, tells you what you need to know without saying a word. Richard had a friend named Rose, they played in this maze garden, you're in this maze garden looking at a bunch of roses wilted. That has to mean something bad happened to Rose. But again, the writers at Bloober Team think you're dumb. So in comes dialogue anyways of Richard finding Rose dead and crying because he never would have figured out these wilting roses were a metaphor for Rose dying if we didn't put in this dialogue.
Rose? No, no, no! Please, wake up! Wake up!
Later, you're going through Henry's mind and you're finding out about the only thing he cares about, his wife and son. And you come across this child's drawing that shows a mom, a dad, and a kid in a wheelchair. Shortly after, you get into this hallway with a wheelchair that moves beside you as you walk down the path. Almost in a way a father would walk side by side with their son. Possibly before they're about to go away on a big mission or some big trip where they're not going to see them for a while, possibly ever again. But again, oh no, you might not understand the deep symbolism of the wheelchair rolling beside Thomas. So cue dialogue of Henry telling his son he's going away.
I don't like it when you go.
I know, but sometimes Daddy needs to work. It's good for all of us. You understand, don't you?
Even the monsters talk in this game, and like they never shut up, going on like comic book supervillains about what they are and what they're feeling and who they're tied to, and now they're going to wear your skin. Bitch, my skin ashy as fuck, go ahead. Point is that the dialogue is heavy-handed, you know, more so than a smack from Vasily Kamatsky. Ultimately, to sum it up, this writing is the result of a writer who wants to make something thought-provoking, but doesn't know how to provoke thought, and is afraid of the thoughts they want to provoke not being provoked, so they just try way too hard to hammer home the point, to the detriment of its own story. And that's the thing, I don't necessarily think the mysteries themselves are horrible. Like, I mean, I think they do have quite a bit of plot holes in them. The thing that really makes me not enjoy this story is that I didn't even get a chance to think about them and read into anything because the game is so concerned about painting everything so clearly, about giving away the context to everything, that I didn't have to think about it. I don't hate the medium on its own. In isolation, whatever, it's a badly written horror game, far from the last or the worst. But expectation and context matter, and in this case the context is that this game takes so much inspiration from Silent Hill 2, while at the same time not understanding why the story of that game worked so well, or how it, you know, engaged the player with its story and themes and whatnot. And the expectation is we're supposed to be alright with them being in charge with remaking Silent Hill 2. Probably one of the most important survival horror games ever made, and probably one of the most important games in terms of storytelling ever made. How can I be alright with Bloober Team taking the reins when they not only missed the fact that a lot of the deeper mysteries in Silent Hill 2 were left to the players to unpack and figure out, and that's what made people want to discuss it for years and years and years, but also tackles a very dark subject matter that Silent Hill 2 also did, and did a million times better. My fear is like mainly the characters are just gonna give away a lot of the themes of this game through, you know, dialogue. You know, they're gonna just be really on the nose about this. You know, what's this? The knife Angela was holding? I wonder if this is a sign that she's suicidal. Looking at this knife, I get a feeling of sadness and grief, and that Angela might have been abused. She might have been abused, guys. It explains the knife. Okay, now I am being just like flat out facetious. I don't expect it to be that level of bad, but like, and on the nose, but like whatever. Like, I still expect something along that lines. And some people might think like that's not a big deal because we already know the story of Silent Hill 2. It's pretty well, like, I disagree. Right, there's going to be a whole new generation of gamers who haven't played this game, who haven't experienced Silent Hill 2, and they deserve to have the story told in a compelling and interesting way that doesn't just browbeat them and nail everything on the head and treat them like they're too dumb to figure it out on their own. Again, something that you could say doesn't affect me, but I actually still think it does, because like, I want to, you know, like, one, I just don't want to hear a character talk every 2 seconds. I wish games would get over this. Like, characters don't need to talk every time they do something. Beyond that, how a story is told is half the experience. You know, if you tell the story in a way that's not enjoyable, even if I already know what's gonna happen, I'm not gonna enjoy it. Even if, and that's my point, even if I know what's gonna happen, if you tell a story well, I'll still enjoy it, right? I'm hoping best case scenario that they do recognize this was a problem within the medium and they tone that down and they try to keep a lot of the, they try to lean on the symbolism and not try to explain it within the game. But I also think the worst case scenario is that they're gonna try to, like, I don't know, make us sympathize with Angela's abuser or make Eddie seem like a good guy. Oh no, feel bad for this guy simply because he got picked on. Time can only tell, and I mean, we don't have that much time left until the game releases, so we'll know soon enough. And yeah, I don't know, I'm holding my breath. I want this remake to be good. I think Bloober Team has the capacity to make it good, but I also think they have the capacity to really screw this up. And yeah, the current gameplay footage you see, you know, for how good it looks, does not instill confidence in me. Same goes for the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, by the way. Like, yeah, it looks good, but I'm not holding my breath until the thing's in my hands and I can actually judge for myself. Because again, fuck Konami. Konami is a scumbag company, and I mean, most of these companies are scumbag companies, but I mean, they're truly a scumbag company. I mean, just watch the plethora of videos that came out when the whole, like, Kojima debacle was coming on about, and how, like, they literally used their influence in Japan to stop Kojima from getting fucking healthcare for his employees. And again, even if they were like an up-and-up corporation, just look at their history with the series. It's not been great. I'd rather be extremely skeptical now and not get disappointed and potentially be surprised than, you know, get excited for this remake, especially after playing the medium. Because my god, playing this game sucks so much. Like, I'm not kidding. The medium was pain. It was genuine pain. And I don't say that about a lot of games, but it was genuinely painful to go through. Why do I do this to myself? Can playing through a game you know you don't like halfway through because you want to make a video be considered a form of self-harm? Because it kind of feels like that. What do you think of the medium? Have you played it? Do you think I'm completely off base? Do you think the Silent Hill 2 remake is going to be great regardless? Do you think I should maybe give some of other Bloober Team's games a try, you know, to maybe, you know... Nah, that's not fucking happening. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't want to go into Silent Hill 2 expecting to hate it, and I am going to try to give it as much of a chance as I can, but... after playing 2 of Bloober Team's games, I do not have confidence in the studio, and I do not expect this to be a satisfying. Because again, like I said, the story is such a big part of what makes Silent Hill 2 what it is. And it doesn't matter if the gameplay's great. If they fuck that up, you are fucking up one of the main draws of this game. So, yeah. I'm the Digital Shinigami. If you like this content, check out more of my stuff. And, I'm gonna go play not the medium. I'll see you all later. Bye.
No! Stay back! Stay back!